to an Israel update, COVID, politics, and everything else with Ofer Bavly and Matt Levin on behalf of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. And a very special welcome to the many new faces that are joining us this morning. Our Federation Live virtual programs are among the many ways that we are reaching out to bring our Jewish community together, as we also work to meet the rising critical needs of our people here in Israel and abroad. And welcome to Giving Tuesday. We are offering today's programs in observance of this important international time to heal, help, and bring hope to those less fortunate. Through our annual campaign, our Federation's funding from more than 70 partner agencies here in Israel and around the world enables us to respond immediately in times like these. With our vital support, our agencies on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis are able to continue, adapt, and increase their care for those most vulnerable in the face of these unprecedented challenges. After our program, we'll email you some information about how to learn more about us, along with the more wonderful and great virtual opportunities we have for you to connect. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. First, your microphone is muted now for the presentation, but you will have the ability to ask questions during our Q&A time afterward. In addition, you can adjust the way your screen appears. If you would like to view the person who is speaking or asking the question, please select Speaker View at the top of the Zoom screen. And now it is my privilege to introduce our speaker, Ofer Bavly. Ofer Bavly is Israel's first third-generation diplomat, the son and grandson of Israeli ambassadors. Mr. Bavly grew up in diplomatic postings around the globe and then served in the Israel Defense Forces, where he reached the rank of captain in the military intelligence branch before attending the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Mr. Bavly has had a very distinguished military career and diplomatic career, most recently as Consul General of Israel to Florida and Puerto Rico from 2007 to 2011, where we actually got to know him very well because he always made himself available. And since 2012, he has served as the Director General of the Israel Office of JUF, Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. Mr. Bavly is also a photographer who has presented 3 exhibits of his works in Jerusalem and in Miami. He speaks fluent Hebrew, English, French, Spanish, and Italian, as well as basic German and Arabic. And for those Americans where we speak less than one language other than English, you put us to shame. He lives in Jerusalem, married to Ayala, and they have 3 adult children. Also joining us is our own distinguished Matt Levin, whose bio I'm not going to go through because he's been with us for 8 years now as the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. Matt, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Marla. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for Giving Tuesday in this incredible 12 hours of programming. Let me also just say that I know this is, we're coming out of a scary time. And your federation has been there to support the community. But please, we are a live federation working. Call us if you need our help. Call us if you want to participate. We simply are waiting for your participation. Thank you today for that introduction. Ofer Bavly is with us. And Ofer Bavly, in addition to all the things that we said, is also a journalist and writes periodically for the blog, The Times of Israel, and really has his pulse on what's happening in the state of Israel. And a thank you to Lonnie Nassiter and the Chicago Federation for giving us Ofer some time this morning. Ofer, let's get right to it. Would you talk a little bit about the coronavirus in Israel? As you know, the rest of the world has heard Israel in the most positive light, actually, in the way in which they've dealt with it, the way Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government had shut down society. So give us a sense of what's happening on the street today with opening of businesses, controlling the virus, all of the related pieces.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for being here today on Giving Tuesday. Yes, we will open with COVID-19 situation, and the numbers in Israel are actually improving. We are cautiously coming out of the crisis. We're still not totally out of the woods, but it does look fairly good. Since yesterday, we've had only 22 people infected, but 139 people recovering. So the numbers are definitely going in that direction. 4 people have been taken off the respirator in the last 24 hours. Throughout this crisis, we've had a total of 237 people dead, including 2 in the last 24 hours. But as I said, the numbers are going down. The trend is definitely downwards. So we have less and less people infected every day. We actually have corona wards in our hospitals shutting down because there's not enough business, not enough clients, not enough people infected to warrant a ward in every hospital. It's still not behind us, and certainly there's going to be a very hard time ahead for our economy and for society. Because while we are battling on the medical front and having considerable successes, there are considerable economic pressures. Our unemployment numbers are up from 4 to 26%. Many businesses, small and large, are suffering. There's also a lot of pressure from parents to return and reopen schools. We've opened some of the schools on Sunday, 2 days ago, 1st to 3rd graders and 11th to 12th graders, but the rest are still closed and probably will open next week. Most definitely the whole educational system will open by the end of May, unless there is a change in the trend in the numbers of people infected. We hope that by reopening everything and reopening businesses, and we're going to open the malls and markets on Thursday. Hopefully it's not too soon, but as you know, the incubation period for COVID-19 is about 2 weeks. So if it is too soon, we'll only see the results of these decisions in 2 to 3 weeks and see if the numbers remain low. If they do remain low, then we know we're on the right track and we can let go of all the different limitations, and it's going to be behind us, and then we're going to have to deal with the economic backlash. There are 3 thresholds which have been designated yesterday by the Prime Minister, 3, I would say, red flags, any one of which, if appears, we're going to have to scale back and go back to some limitations. The first red flag would be if there are over 100 new cases in a single day. Currently, we have about 22 in a single day, so we're far from having 100 a day. If we go up to 100 a day, we'll go back to limitations. If the number of infected persons doubles in 10 days or less, then again, we'll go back to limitations. Currently, that number is not only not doubling, it's actually shrinking. And if the number of severe cases goes over 300, we'll go back to restrictions. Currently, the number of severe cases is only 89. So it does look like we're not going to hit any of those 3 red flags, but if we do, we can always go back to some form of limitations. For now, the international borders remain closed, except for Israeli citizens who may fly to Israel. There are very limited flights, but Israeli citizens are allowed to come back home if they can find a flight, but then they will have to go into 14 days of seclusion for Israeli citizens, as well as new immigrants, new Olim, who will also have to go into a 14-day quarantine. That may change next week or the week afterwards. Wearing face masks is still compulsory in public. There's a $55 fine if you're found not wearing a mask. Social distancing has become the norm here, as it is in the United States. And when you go into stores, they limit the number of people going in, and you have to stand in line 6 feet apart, etc. So there's a lot of different limitations that are keeping us healthy and safe. The government has been implementing an aid package to large retailers, the ones that have many employees, to the tune of about $1.7 billion. The IDF has been very helpful in helping develop high-tech solutions, including respirators, diagnostics, etc. Definitely the closure we had over Passover and Independence Day was very good. It was very effective. It helped really keep people inside, and probably that was one of the reasons why we're seeing the good numbers today. And of course, there's a high rate of adherence to regulations by the general public. People are obeying the instructions, they understand the risks, but after a month and a half, naturally, people are getting tired and want to go out, want to resume normal life. Total cost to our economy so far has been about $12 billion, which is considerable for a country our size. We are looking at the first time in the last over a decade probably that we're going to see a very small, if at all, economic growth at the end of the year. Our GDP is likely to shrink short term, but will probably rebound in the longer term. There is a $25 billion aid package that the government is instituting for the entire economy. Most of it has not been distributed yet, but they are giving this as unemployment benefits to the unemployed, as well as securing loans, loan guarantees, and grants for small and medium-sized businesses to be able to stay afloat and continue to operate, not only because the market needs them, but also because their employees need them. We are cooperating with the Palestinian Authority, trying to minimize the spread of COVID in the West Bank, although the Palestinian Authority at the same time blames us for blocking their efforts to control the virus. The fact of the matter is it has not been spreading through the West Bank, and I think the Palestinian situation is fairly good. We are helping them with both equipment and training their medical staff, again, while they blame us for everything. And the positives of this situation is much less air pollution, traffic accidents are down, and the government has really accelerated its investment in infrastructure development on railways and roads during this month and a half. So we've really picked up some steam on improving the railway system as well as the highway system, taking advantage of the fact that there was no traffic and people were closed in. So those are the benefits of the situation as we see it right now.
Thanks, Ofer. There was a report this week, and I don't know if you want to comment on it, that Israel was negotiating with several European nations on a protocol over standards and entry into the country, some other economic pieces. Anything you want to comment on that?
So Israel has pledged to join a pan-European effort to find a cure and establish a protocol. We're going to be putting about $60 million into this European fund to be part of a European effort to combat COVID and also to set up a protocol for future cases of COVID or other such pandemics. So definitely we want to be part of that. We are isolated, we are an island, and that has been good for us because, ironically, the fact that our borders are closed has been beneficial when you try to control the pandemic. And by shutting down our airport, we were effectively shutting down the whole country from the exterior. But we do see ourselves as part of the international community. We think that we have a lot to share, and we're happy to join in this international effort. Obviously, if Israel does advance towards a cure or towards vaccination, and there are first signs that a research center in Nes Ziona, which is our main biological research center, is advancing rapidly towards a solution, if that should happen, then I am sure that our government will be happy to share those findings with the international community. We're not going to keep it for itself.
Thanks, Ofer. That's Ofer. Let's turn a little bit away, and we'll come back to Corona. I'm sure we'll continue to play into our things. But let's talk a little bit about the formation of a government and where you're at in the ongoing election process. Obviously, now it's been seen through the lens of Corona for the last month. But where do you think we're going now in terms of the case at the Supreme Court or the courts about the national unity government?
So as I'm sure everybody around this Zoom call knows, the political situation in Israel is volatile always, especially in the last couple of months. It's been even more volatile. To put things in perspective, as you know, we've had an unprecedented 3 elections in the course of 1 year, something that's never happened before in Israel because, in a nutshell, because of a tie or a deadlock between the left wing and the right wing in Israel, none of which was able to get a majority coalition formed in order to swear in a government. And because we've had to go through 3 election campaigns, we've had a period of political instability, lack of stability economically as well, no legislation for over a year. The budget is stalled for over a year. So this is definitely a situation that nobody is looking to prolong. In the last elections that we had in the month of March, there was a slight change to the deadlock with 62 members of Knesset out of 120. So it's a very tiny majority, but still a majority, saying that they would support another candidate who would not be Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been our prime minister for a decade and a half. So that's a major change. And for the first time, there were 62 members of Knesset recommending another candidate for prime minister, being Benny Gans. But then with the corona situation and some political maneuvers inside the blocs, mostly members of the Gans side switching allegiance, everything was thrown up in the air. The prime minister calling for a national unity crisis government to deal with the coronavirus and saying, let's join hands and have a joint government. Now, Benny Gantz ran on a ticket of basically 2 main promises, which were found to be incompatible. One of his promise was, I will run in order to end Netanyahu's prime ministership, because Netanyahu is under 3 counts of indictment, and Benny Gantz said the country cannot be run by a prime minister under indictment. However, Benny Gantz also made another promise. He said, I will form a coalition without relying on the support of the Arab party in the Knesset. Now, as it turned out, the Arab party had 15 seats in the elections, an unprecedented number for them. And then Gantz couldn't make those 2 promises compatible, because if you run and you have a block of 62 to stop Netanyahu, those 62 include the support of the Arab list. If you give up the support of the Arab list, you don't have 62, and you can't fulfill your promise of replacing Netanyahu. So Gantz was in a quandary, and at the same time, with the coronavirus, and that's how it ties in, Netanyahu said, forget about politics, this is a time of crisis, let's join hands, let's have a unity government together. Gantz agreed. He said, I'm stepping up to the plate, this is a time of crisis, this is not a time for politics, and I agree to join Netanyahu in a national unity government where we will share power. That, of course, made Gantz's party, called Blue and White, break up, because half of his party said, we can't renege on our promise, do everything in our power to eject Netanyahu from the prime minister's seat. And if you join Netanyahu and go into a power sharing with him, then you are breaking our main campaign promise, which is to replace Netanyahu. So half of Blue and White abandoned Benny Gantz and said, we're not going to join the government. Benny Gantz made an agreement with Netanyahu to share power, and in fact reneged on all of his promises, including the promise that he would not let Netanyahu be first prime minister if they share and take turn. So the agreement actually stipulates that Netanyahu gets to be prime minister for the first half of the term, Benny Gantz gets to be prime minister in the second half, and they share the ministerial positions between them half and half. So it's an equal and balanced government. But a government that will have an inordinate number of ministers in order to accommodate the political needs of both parties, which to many Israelis seems ridiculous, because if this is a crisis government, an emergency government, because of the economic situation where you have over 1 million people unemployed, this is not the time to waste money and build no less than 36 government ministries, up from about 20, which is the norm, just to accommodate the political needs of politicians in both sides of the coalition. 36 government ministers plus 16 deputy ministers the sheer economic cost is going to be staggering, and people can't understand how can the government be wasting so much money when we need that money to support people who are suffering right now from this crisis. The other side, the way Benny Gantz is presenting it, he says, well, look, I saved us from going to a fourth election, because had I not signed an agreement with Netanyahu, we would have gone into a fourth election, which would have cost billions more, and definitely more costly than 36 government ministers. He also says half the government is going to be appointed by me, from my party. So that's also good, because it's not going to be a right-wing government. It's going to be half right-wing, half, I would say, center or center-left. And most importantly, Benny Gantz says, thanks to me and thanks to this agreement, there's a so-called expiry date for Netanyahu's term. In 18 months, Netanyahu is out and I replace him, and I am the first person to be able to actually get Netanyahu out of the prime minister's seat, thereby fulfilling my campaign promise. Now, of course, there's a lot of pitfalls, because as everybody knows, that could change. In the next 18 months, when Netanyahu is prime minister, anything can happen. And a lot of people are saying that Benny Gantz is somewhat, I would say, Pollyannic or naive to believe that there will actually be a rotation halfway through the term of the government. I can explain later why that would happen. But in essence, the agreement is there. Now, of course, as soon as the agreement was signed, there were a number of petitions to the Supreme Court on two grounds. The first ground is that a person under indictment, such as Netanyahu, cannot form a government, cannot be the prime minister. Now, the law in Israel does not say that. There is no law that an indicted person can't be prime minister. There is a law that if indicted, you can't serve as a government minister. There's no law against being prime minister, because the lawmakers never envisaged that a prime minister would be indicted. Certainly not on three serious crimes such as bribe, fraud, and breach of trust. So there is no law. Legally speaking, a prime minister can serve as long as he is not found guilty by the last instance of appeal, which would be the Supreme Court. If he's found guilty by a lower court, he can appeal. And then if he's found guilty by the Supreme Court, only then does he have to resign. But the appeals right now, the petitions to the Supreme Court are saying, this is not a prime minister. This is a prime minister candidate, because he's not the prime minister. He's only interim. This term ended a year and a half ago. And right now, if he signs an agreement with Gans, he will be prime minister. So therefore, we are asking the Supreme Court to say a would-be prime minister cannot form government if he is indicted. That was the first petition. The second petition to the Supreme Court was on the coalition agreement between Netanyahu and Gans, because they're saying that the coalition agreement is going to include a lot of legal issues. There's going to be a lot of changes to the basic laws of the state. Our basic laws are akin to your constitution. We don't have a constitution. But the laws are going to have to be amended to accommodate for this kind of power sharing between two prime ministers. And so the petitioners to the Supreme Court are saying this agreement cannot be legal. We're asking the Supreme Court to void it. So yesterday and the day before, that would be Sunday and Monday, the Supreme Court deliberated over those two issues. Sunday, they talked about, they heard both sides on whether an indicted person can be prime minister. And on Monday, they heard both sides on whether the coalition agreement is legal or else. The Attorney General, when he was asked by the Supreme Court, he said, yes, there are legal difficulties in the agreement, and there are legal difficulties in an indicted member of Knesset forming a government, but he said, there's no legal prohibition, there's no law against it. And he said, this is the Attorney General, he said, I don't see a reason why the Supreme Court should intervene in what is essentially a political question. This is not a question for the courts, it's a question for lawmakers. And if 61 members of Knesset want to support Netanyahu as it stands right now, including Benny Gantz and his group, they want to support him for prime minister, then that is a political decision. It's not for the court to opine. The court has not issued its decision on these two issues, but it has indicated yesterday that there are, in fact, some clauses in the coalition agreement which need to be amended immediately before it goes to the Knesset. And today, Likud and Blue and White are changing the coalition agreement in accordance to what the court said yesterday, but the court has not ruled yet on those two issues. Now, the time clock is running because the deadline to present a candidate for prime minister is Thursday, in 2 days. And by then, 61 members of the Knesset have to recommend that Netanyahu be prime minister. And they're hoping that the Supreme Court will opine on this before Thursday. My belief is that the Supreme Court will not come out before Thursday saying that Netanyahu can't be prime minister. I think they will try to stay out of this minefield. And they will probably not make any serious criticism of the coalition agreement either. So far, there are voices on the right attacking the court, saying if the court intervenes in a Knesset issue, they are out of bounds. They must respect the will of the people and the will of 61 members of Knesset. Yesterday, in his TV appearance, Prime Minister Netanyahu said exactly the same thing. He was very, very careful not to actually threaten the Supreme Court, but he said to the Supreme Court in no uncertain terms, he said, if the Supreme Court intervenes and either changes the coalition agreement or declares me unfit to be prime minister, this is an undemocratic move by the Supreme Court, overriding the will of the people as represented by 61 members of Knesset, and this will be crossing a red line. So he's sending a very, very clear message to the Supreme Court. I believe the Supreme Court will not strike down either the agreement or Netanyahu. They do strike down part of the agreement, any clause in the coalition agreement, that could be a deal breaker for the whole coalition agreement because it's built layer upon layer, brick upon brick, with guarantees to safeguard the rotation halfway through the term. For example, it provides that once Netanyahu hands over the baton to Benny Gantz in 18 months and Benny Gantz becomes prime minister, Netanyahu will have a title which this day doesn't exist in Israel, which is alternate prime minister. And the agreement says, as alternate prime minister, he will have an official house, he will have a whole staff, he will have a security detail, exactly like a prime minister. This is all new. This all requires legislation. If the Supreme Court says that this cannot stand, then Netanyahu will break the deal. He will say the Supreme Court broke the coalition agreement, I'm no longer bound by it, and we go to a fourth election. If we go to a fourth election, Netanyahu probably ends up winning big time from whatever happens, because remember, Blue and White broke up when Benny Gantz joined Netanyahu and signed a coalition agreement with him. When he agreed to join his government, then he went down from 32 seats to only 16. Half his party stayed behind, and they're going to be in the opposition. So there is no Blue and White party to speak of. If we do go to fourth election, Likud runs virtually unopposed. There will be very little opposition to them, and they will use the Supreme Court's intervention as their main agenda in the election, saying, look, the Supreme Court has overstepped its boundaries. It has overruled the will of the people by striking down our coalition agreement. We were forthcoming. We wanted to do what the people want, which is a national unity government, but the Supreme Court is against us. Vote for us and show the Supreme Court that we are stronger. So if we go to a fourth election, I expect Netanyahu to have very little, if any, opposition, and he will have a very strong horse to run in the election, which is the anti-Supreme Court sentiment among the people. So there is, on its face, there is a reason for Netanyahu to want to go to a fourth election, even at the same time as he denies it and staunchly says a fourth election would be catastrophic for the country We have to avoid it in any cost. But I will tell you that between us, if there is a fourth election, I don't think that Netanyahu will shed too many tears. Politically, it will serve his interests, which puts Benny Gantz in a very tight situation because, as I said, he now has only about 16 members of Knesset. How can he run a government at a year and a half from now with, let's say, 75 members of Knesset, where he only controls 15? He will have 60 members of Knesset on the right who will be against him, who will want Netanyahu to continue as prime minister, and who will make life very difficult for Benny Gantz. So whatever way this works, either we do go into a government or we go into elections, it's not going to be very easy for Benny Gantz, and it will be fairly good for Netanyahu. But of course, anything can happen, and his trial, which is set to begin May 24th, could change everything. The first test of unity for this government will be how we exit from the corona crisis, how we handle the economic costs of the crisis. But on these issues, there's no big difference between government and opposition, certainly not between Likud and blue and white. Everybody agrees we need to do everything we can to get out of this economic crisis as quickly as possible. The bigger threat to unity, though, is going to be the next topic on the government's agenda, which is the annexation of parts of the West Bank as provided for by the Trump peace plan. Now, the peace plan, which has been shelved, is going to be back on the table as soon as the government is formed. And that's definitely going to be on the agenda for Netanyahu and the right-wing parties. Secretary of State Pompeo and U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman have signaled that the U.S. would not fight Israel if Israel were to annex parts of the West Bank and the Jordan Valley as part of the deal, which of course immediately the right wing and the Netanyahu government pounced on and said, yes, we're going to start with annexation. We're going to do it soon. They even set a date to start working on it in July. As soon as the government is formed, they're going to give the government a couple of months, and then they want to start legislating annexation in the Knesset, which is when the Trump administration immediately put the brakes and said, hold on, you can't cherry pick in the peace plan. You can't say, I like annexation, I don't like statehood for the Palestinians. It's a package deal. You have to take the whole thing or reject it, but you can't take only the parts of the deal that you like and reject the other parts. So expect some kind of a discussion between the Israeli government and the US administration on that starting in July. And there will be an internal discussion in the coalition between Netanyahu and Gantz, because while Gantz and his party may support some limited annexation on the Jordan Valley, which is the border between the West Bank and the country of Jordan, they will certainly oppose annexation inside the West Bank, and on that there may be a clash. I will remind you that although he has been in power for a decade and a half, Netanyahu hasn't actually annexed a single inch of land in the West Bank so far, even when he had a right-wing government under his hands and no opposition, he didn't annex land. So there's a lot of reasons why he didn't do it, and there are reasons why he may not be so quick to annex in the future. I would say that there are a number of reasons I can mention off the top of my head. One would be a strong opposition from the international community, United Nations. The European Union has already expressed its opinion against it. The Arab League only last week called on the US not to support any annexation of the Jordan Valley. Certainly an annexation would be problematic for our peace agreements with Jordan and with Egypt, who are strongly opposed to any annexation. That may put at risk our very peace deals with those two countries, something that Netanyahu has been reluctant to do so far. It will irritate our new friends in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states. We have a fledgling relationship with those countries. It's only now starting to bud, and that will backtrack quickly if we annex any part of land. Those countries are going to be strongly against it. They're going to cut off any discrete ties or dialogue that they may have with us at the moment. Certainly the anti-Iran coalition is going to be at risk. It will draw the spotlight away from Iran as the bad guy in the Middle East to us as the bad guy in the Middle East. And of course, if we go ahead with any annexation or even talk of annexation, it will weaken the leadership of a relatively moderate president of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen. It will strengthen Hamas. We'll run the risk of an intifada, attacks from Gaza, possibly attacks from the north, from Hezbollah, which is now free to put its focus on us now that the Syrian civil war is over. So any talk of annexation could bring flames to the entire Middle East, and not to mention the fact that this will also put us in a tight situation with the Democratic Party in the United States at a time when we would want to sort of try to reestablish Israel as a bipartisan issue. This would, again, drive another wedge between us and the Democrats. As I said, the trial for Netanyahu begins May 24. The government, if in fact is formed, will probably be sworn in sometime mid-May, maybe next week. We see a vulnerable government in Israel, a volatile government in the best case scenario. So look for the next couple of months for some interesting and exciting news out of Israel.
Yeah, I think the wild card in that analysis obviously becomes the U.S. election and how the U.S. And the return to our economy. I think, clearly between now and November, it's the economy stupid here in America, and whether or not foreign policy, especially the issues of Israel, are going to get involved in, and ultimately the race, I think, is going to be a wait to see. On the other hand, President Trump might want to move forward because he needs to have something in his pocket going into the election. So I think we have to look and see. I think at this point, Ofer, we're going to open it up and to the staff. We're going to open it up for some questions from the audience. It's about 9:40 right now, so we've got about 10, 15 minutes. Let's see if there's any questions from those on the line.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you both for a very, very informative program, and remind everyone that to raise your hand, you click on the participants button, and then there's a little icon to raise your hand, and we'll call on you. So we'll give it a moment.
Mark Friedman's got one there.
Friedman.
Good morning, everybody. Ofer, it's good to see you. We miss you in South Florida, and thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mark.
I love your background there at Chicago. It's like Jerusalem.
Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem.
Okay. My question is about the coalition discussions and the activity that's going on in the court. So you mentioned that Netanyahu stated that either eliminating him or disqualifying him from being prime minister or voiding the coalition agreement would cross a red line. Is that a rhetorical red line? I mean, is there some action he could take, or is it just inevitably going to lead to a fourth election?
There's no action he can take against the Supreme Court. And once the Supreme Court makes a decision, there's no way for him to fight it. But you can imagine that this is pitting our, two branches of government, one against the other, which is not good in any way. Whoever comes out winning, that kind of a clash between the Knesset, the legislative branch, and the judiciary branch is not good for anyone. That's also why I believe the Supreme Court is not going to declare that Netanyahu is unfit. It will declare maybe that some part of the agreement should be changed. And then it's up to Netanyahu to decide whether he changes those parts of the agreement and he can live with it, or he breaks the whole deal and goes to a fourth election using it as a pretext. But whatever the Supreme Court says, Netanyahu will have to accept and will have to respect. But is definitely, and has been doing so for the last weeks, mounting a public campaign against the Supreme Court, calling the Supreme Court in all but express words, saying it is undemocratic, it is despotic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's using some very harsh terms to delegitimize the whole judiciary system, which is certainly not something which is good for our future. But he can't actually fight the Supreme Court in actual terms.
Marla, I think Rabbi Englander may have somebody who's on there.
Yeah, there was a gentleman who raised his hand, but it looks like he unraised his hand. He's back. David Engels.
Yes, thank you. A lot of us have family in Israel and had plans to visit, and of course we can't now. So the question is there any idea of when the borders would open? And in particular, would there be special considerations for people with family in Israel?
So while Israel may agree to open its borders, I think that there will be a problem with people coming in and potentially carrying with them the virus back into Israel, just as we've managed to control the situation. That will be the biggest fear. So I think that this will probably be the last thing that will open. And that may take a couple of months because I think there's a fear. The downside of having a bumper year for tourism is that a lot of people come to Israel. Last year we had over 3 million tourists. If that happens again and we have even 1 million people coming in over the summer, which is top high season, if we have 1 million people coming in from all over the world and the virus is not being contained in the countries of provenance, then we're just importing it back into Israel. So I think that it would be fair to assume that we will not open the international border for at least a couple of months, just to be on the safe side.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question, if anyone would like to ask. Okay.
Ofer, hold on one second. Ofer,
Sure.
can you just briefly talk on some of the situation that's gone on the last couple of days in Syria? There seems to be a more public split in the Assad government and some of his longtime supporters, especially those economic supporters of his. And do you think that has any real long-term impact on Assad's stability in the post in the rearview mirror of the civil war? You would think he'd be more consolidating right now, but that seems to be not necessarily the case.
So I don't see a real threat to Assad's regime at the moment. I think that if he's been able to survive the war, I think he will survive the post-war period as well. I think that he is receiving the support that he needs, maybe not as much economic support, but he is receiving the support he needs for the moment from both Russia and Iran. For as far as we're concerned, the threat to us is not so much from the Assad regime as it is from Iran. And the threat from that front is certainly not gone. Iran continues to entrench itself in Syria, taking advantage of the volatile situation there. Lebanon certainly is in turmoil for economic reasons. We see growing resentment inside Lebanon against the government, a lot of instability. We know from past experience this instability serves the radicals in Lebanon as well. Hezbollah is, of course, very active, still arming itself, still looking for the next confrontation with us. By the way, as I mentioned before, Hezbollah was deeply involved in the Syrian civil war. Now they're out of that war. They can focus on us again. Maybe if there's any talk of implementation of the peace plan, that will be a trigger for Hezbollah to start some kind of a skirmish on our northern border in order to torpedo any such talks. And again, Iran continues to build its bases in Syria. We continue to fight them on an almost daily basis. In the last couple of weeks, we've attacked inside Syria at least 5 times. I say at least because there are 5 times that have been publicized, but nobody knows how many times we've attacked and not given it any publicity. The last attack was yesterday when we attacked a research and development facility north of the city of Aleppo in Syria. Apparently, this was a research center for precise weaponry as well as chemical weapons. So our war in Syria continues. We continue to fight the Iranian presence there, not so much the Syrian army, but more the Iranian and foreign army supporting the Syrian regime. I expect our operations in Syria to continue. with the aim of stopping Iran's encroachment and their attempt to ultimately establish a land connection going all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean and bringing Iranian troops all the way to our doorstep rather than being 1,000 miles away. They are now aligned along the Golan border. So that is for us an imminent and very real threat that we are going to have to fight on a daily basis.
Ofer, I'm going to turn it back to Marla to say goodbye, but Ofer, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your incredible report today. And the Chicago Jewish community is lucky to have you, as we were. I'm lucky to have you as a friend and colleague. Marla, take it away.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to thank you both, and also just chime in, Ofer, that you took very complex issues and helped make them understandable. And we thank you so much for taking the time. I would now like to turn our program over to Tracy Kawa, who's the co-chair of Giving Tuesday for our federation. Tracy?
Thank you, Marla. A huge thank you to Ofer Bavly, Matt Levin, and to all of you for joining us today. I'm Tracy Kawa. Jeffrey Bavarnik and I are the proud co-chairs for Giving Tuesday for the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County, and I'm grateful to share just a few moments with you. Today on Giving Tuesday, caring people around the world are coming together to heal, help, and bring hope to those less fortunate. Our federation is reaching out into the community, not only with this great day of programming, but also with an important opportunity for each of you to make a vital difference. Every day with our agency partners, our federation is there for so many people who need help with life's very essentials. During this unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, the number of those who need us is rising rapidly. More and more of our neighbors are struggling with loss of income, illness and grief, family stress, and emotional and physical isolation. We must be compassionate, non-complacent, and community-minded. I'm proud to say that our federation is meeting this moment, as we always do, and we need your continued support. Because of our annual campaign, we're able to respond at a moment's notice with our supporting agencies. But it's clear that we will need to help so many more vulnerable people with food, financial assistance, mental health care, and other critical services. Your gift to the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County's annual campaign does all of this and more. So especially in these times, we invite you to join us on this Giving Tuesday. If you're in a position to give, please make a donation of any size. You can go to jewishboca.org/donate. I'm sure we'll have that link in the chat box. If you've already made a gift to us, please consider increasing it. The link to donate will also be included in the email you received after the program. Again, thank you so much for your support and for supporting our amazing community. Back to you, Marla.
Thank you, Tracy. Look for your email with additional ways to connect with our federation and our Jewish community during these unprecedented times. Together with our caring community, we will heal, we will help, and we will give. So I say to you all, stay safe and be well. Thank you for taking the time. Bye now.